Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new video where we will be taking a deep dive into 6 of the more interesting fights taking place this weekend at UFC 247. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone that took time out of their day yesterday to watch the live stream where we broke down the fight between Alex Morono and Kaylen Williams together. Thank you to everyone that hit the like button on that video, and also thank you to everyone that left a comment. Over the last month, I've been getting a little bit down with all the negativity that I've been taking online at the moment. There's a reason why I haven't put out that many YouTube videos, but I'm ready to get back on the horse in a big way in February and March and bring you loads more content, guys. But the comments I was getting on yesterday's video were amazing, and I am slowly working my way through them, man. I want to respond to every single one of you, so appreciate the positivity, and hopefully I can repay your positivity, man, by helping you out with this video today. So, you know, whether it's talking about some stuff in these fights that you may not have thought of, and you may be thinking, you know what, that crazy Welsh dude has got a point. Maybe I want to pump the brakes and pass on one of these bets that I was thinking about. Or maybe I come up with something in the, in the video where I talk about one of these fights that you haven't thought of that makes you feel even more confident in the bets you've already locked in. Fingers crossed, whatever happens, we can either save you some money or help you make some money this weekend, preferably the latter. So yeah, that's all I got to say, boys. Oh, and one more thing, if you do want me to drop one of those live streams on fight day this weekend, just before UFC 247, where we dig through all the prop bets on this card to try and dig up some fun parlays, some fun bets to make watching the fights more interesting, where we try and find a decent value prop for every fight, then hit the like button. If this video gets 300 likes Saturday, I will drop that live stream where we all kind of hang out, talk about the fights, try and find some decent props, try and find some decent parlays, and have a laugh. I mean, that's actually the favourite piece of content that I bring you guys, man. I love sitting down with you guys on fight day and just chopping up, going through these fights, trying to find some fun bets. But enough of talking about all that stuff, because it is time to get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Justin Tafa against Juan Adams. Now, this is one of the fights that I was going to live stream my research for on YouTube, because of course we've got some footage of Tafa outside of the UFC, which we could have used to kind of like break him down together. But when I started to look into this fight, started to watch some of Juan Adams' past fights, I just decided that there wasn't really enough material there to actually make a live stream out of, and it would probably be better if we just watch this footage together on this video to kind of see what Tafa is bringing to the table. So this is a strange fight, and it kind of summarizes how I feel about this event in general. This is a particularly bad pay-per-view. I feel this is a really bad quality pay-per-view. And to see Juan Adams and Justin Tafa so high up on this card, you know, just before the main event, is so strange when you take into consideration both guys are very inexperienced. This will only be Tafa's 5th pro fight. He's coming into the fight on a loss. And Juan Adams also pretty damn inexperienced, coming into this fight on a 2-fight losing streak. So very, very strange fight to see on the main card, and a very, very strange matchup in general, to be honest. So if we take a look at this fight from a stylistic point of view, it becomes clear very, very quickly that this is a nightmare stylistic matchup for Justin Tafa. This is a very, very easy fight for Juan Adams. And the reason why it's such an easy fight for him is because, based on past performances, Justin Tafa just doesn't have any takedown defense or any ground game. Now, it's a little bit of an assumption because obviously there isn't that much recent footage available of him online. You know, there's only really 3 fights dating back over the last 3 years. But at the same time, all we can do is work with the information we've got, and based on what we've seen, it ain't good. And that spells trouble for Tafa, because Juan Adams is one of these guys that's very big, very athletic. He moves very well for a guy that's 6'5". You know, usually the bigger the fighter is, the slower they are, the more cumbersome they move. But Juan Adams moves really good for a big guy. And he does have an NCAA Division I level wrestling background, which you wouldn't usually expect from a guy this big. I know some people say it doesn't mean as much when you've got NCAA Division 1 level wrestling when you're a big guy, because it's less competitive. It's not like if you're Colby Covington size and you're around about the average size for a man, so there's going to be way more high-level athletes to compete against. I understand Adams' NCAA Division 1 credentials might not mean as much as, say, a Frankie Edgar's or a Gregor Gillespie's or a Colby Covington, but still, it does show the gulf in skill between grappling when you compare Justin Tafa to Juan Adams. So before we go any further, I think what we should do is take a little bit of time to study some footage on Justin Tafa so you know what this guy is bringing to the table, and then we can talk about this fight from a betting perspective. So the first piece of footage that I want to show you is from Justin Tafa's fight immediately before he got signed to the UFC from XFC 41. It's from against David Tumonpao. I probably completely butchered that name. Now, we can't find the first round from this fight, only the second round. So we're just going to hit play here and see what happens. So Justin Tafa is in the black and the yellow shorts. And one thing straight away that should jump out at you when you watch Tafa here is quite how quite slow and flat-footed he is. So this is the second round. Obviously, you know, we haven't got the first round to see what happened, but he's already quite slow, already flat-footed at this stage in the fight, and we have to remember that Juan Adams is an absolutely huge guy, right? He's going to have a massive size advantage over Tafa. Tafa's 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. Adams is 6'5" with an 81-inch reach. So he's going to have an enormous, a 7-inch reach advantage, and it's going to be difficult for Justin Tafa to get inside and land. He doesn't look particularly big in here, and where he's quite flat-footed, kind of plodding forward. Can't help but feel that if he would go into the the fight against Adams like that, kind of walking forward, not really focusing on defense, very flat-footed, chin up high and exposed. Even though Adams isn't the most technical striker, Tafa's probably going to get himself into a lot of trouble. And let's be real, it's one of the reasons why he was knocked out in his UFC debut against Jorgen De Castro, is because he literally just came forward, showing De Castro absolutely no respect at all. Chin up high and exposed, and he ate an absolute bomb. So there are clues within this Tumonpao fight that Tafa doesn't have the best striking defense. Certainly very flat-footed. So let's watch a bit more footage on Tafa now. Now, we've got to bear in mind that, the further we go back in Tafa's career, the less relevant this footage is going to become. Because Jeremy Joyner, he fought him back in 2018, which is going on to be, 18 months ago now. Tafa's only 26 years old, so he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. And that actually brings me on to one of the points that I want to make about Justin Tafa, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. If we take a look at his Instagram profile, we can see that he is currently training out in Tiger Muay Thai. If we see, there he's wearing like the Tiger Muay Thai jersey, and he's out there at the moment with Tai Tuivasa, and Mark Hunt is also out there, although he's not in this picture. So Tiger Muay Thai is, even though it's called Tiger Muay Thai, I think they've rebranded to Tiger Muay Thai and MMA, but Tiger Muay Thai is one of the best MMA gyms in the world, and a young, talented, hungry, ambitious fighter like Justin Tafa, they can improve an incredible amount in a short space of time by going to train at Tiger Muay Thai. Because, when you look at the guys that, Tafa has come up training with, like your Tai Tuivasa, who's in these pictures with him, and where is Tuivasa? He was in one of them, right? Where's Tuivasa gone? Tuivasa's in the... Right, we've seen Tuivasa in the picture, right? I'm not dreaming that. I'm sure I just showed you like a second ago. It doesn't even matter. We saw Tuivasa in the pictures, but Tafa's currently over there with Mark Hunt and Tuivasa. And if we think about these guys, they don't really evolve that much from fight to fight. Tuivasa, we knew when he came into the UFC that he had really bad takedown offense and a low-level ground game. And in his fights against JDS and that, we can see that he hasn't evolved. And that's the concern, where you've got a guy like Tafa training with a team like that, knowing that, his striking's probably going to continue to get better, his boxing's going to continue to get better, but his game planning, his fight IQ, his strategy, his takedown offense, his ground game isn't. So it's a bad thing that he has been training with Tuivasa and Hunt for so long, but it's also a great thing that Tafa appears to be taking positive steps to change his career and move things forward by moving over to Thailand to train at Tiger Muay Thai. And, you know, I'm talking about Tafa's weaknesses on the ground so much, and you're yet to actually see exactly what I'm talking about. So I think we see a little bit in this fight against Jeremy Joyner. But just remember, this fight took place 18 months ago, so it's likely that Tafa will have improved quite a lot since then. But the one thing that I do want to point out in this fight is that Juan Adams, like I say, is a very big dude. I mean, we see Joyner land a big right hand on Tafa there, and he's trying to back Tafa up by winging that right hook. And it's just one of these things where, you know, it's an impressive win inside 30 seconds for Tafa, but you can see that he's showing his opponent absolutely no respect at all. He's literally just stood flat-footed in front of him, just trying to put him away with combinations. And several times we see Joyner wing that right hand, and it landed clean and hard on Tafa, you know, one time, and the rest of the time it didn't kind of land clean because Joyner was more focused on surviving, basically. There we see he almost walks under the right hand twice. But this is the problem with Tafa. It's the reason why he got knocked out in his debut against the Castro. And the thing is, Juan Adams, he's a big, tall, athletic dude. It's not going to be easy to get inside and land on him, to cover that 7-inch reach distance, to get inside the height difference between both guys. It's tough. So Tafa is going to have big problems if he turns up and fights like that against Juan Adams, right? So now, let's take a look at another one of Tafa's fights. This is from Dylan Tialigia, or however you pronounce that. I know I'm butchering this as well. Now, this fight is very concerning, right? We haven't got a lot of footage to work from on Tafa, right? We've got 2 minutes in his UFC debut against the Castro, 30 seconds against Tumapao, 30 seconds against Joyner. This fight, there's a good 8 minutes of footage on Tafa here, but the problem is, this fight took place such a long time ago, back in May 2017, that Tafa is likely to have improved so much since then, and also, this was his pro debut, right? But if we hit play here, something that Dominic Cruz says that I absolutely love is that, you know, even though this fight was a long time ago, we don't really have anything else to judge Tafa on. So, while it's very likely that Tafa's made big improvements since this fight, we can't be absolutely sure because this is all we've got to work with. So you do see a good amount of Tafa's grappling in this matchup. And to be perfectly honest with you, he looks completely doomed. He looks completely doomed, and you'll see that in this matchup. He jumps in on a very nice single leg here, turns the corner and gets it straight into half guard. And you're thinking at this point, you know, Tafa is a big, strong dude. He's going to have a decent amount of success here, but look at how easily Tailaga is able to reverse him and end up on top. And what you might be seeing here with Tafa is, you know, there's no doubt that Tafa is a striker, right? He's spoken in the past about his father or his grandfather being, you know, former pro boxers and stuff like that. But I always use this analogy when it comes to betting on MMA. A lot of fighters are like a moth that get sucked into the bug zapper, where they might have an advantage in one area, but because they're so worried about their weakness, they actually try and beat their opponent to the punch by taking the fight to the one area where they can have a lot of success, right? Or they take it to the one area where they might struggle. And in this case, it's the ground game, right? Maybe Tafa's so worried about what Dylan can do to him on the ground, it forces him, or it actually leads him to actually initiate the grappling exchange. And that's what you've got to be worried about with it, with an inexperienced guy like Tafa. Remember, this is only going to be his 5th pro fight. He can make those mistakes. He can demonstrate that bad fight IQ that will get him into trouble. And even here in this fight, we're seeing him very flat-footed, standing right in front of Dylan, eating clean, hard shots, just not moving his head, no footwork. Like I say, very flat-footed, very easy to hit, which is actually crazy because when you think about it, you know, if we just skip ahead, because I want to show you a little bit more of his grappling and how much he might struggle if this fight does go to the ground. But if we just skip ahead, you know, we can see Tafa again has dragged Dylan to the ground here. He's mounted Dylan. You know, it's very unlikely he's going to be able to do that to an NCAA Division 1 level wrestler like Juan Adams. But the thing with Tafa is, man, in all areas he looks to be a very low level. So on one hand, you'd be thinking, oh, you know, Tafa trains with Tuivasa and Hunt, and you know his dad's a former pro boxer, and you've got Juan Adams with his NCAA Division 1 level wrestling background. You'd be thinking, well, maybe this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. If Tafa can keep the fight standing, he might have a lot of success here. But I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure. I actually think Juan Adams might have the advantage standing up and on the ground. Because to me, Tafa's just not looking good. I mean, look at this. Similar story, really, to the first fight that we watched. It was in the second round, where Tafa's just stood flat-footed right in front of his opponent. And to survive, really, and alleviate pressure, he shoots that takedown, gets the fight to the ground. And he's in the side control. But I think this is where we see a little bit of the weaknesses from Tafa's ground game that I wanted you to appreciate for yourself. So, very weak top control here. His opponent literally just slips out the back door and ends up in top position here. And you've got to remember now, Tafa is going in there against an NCAA Division 1 level wrestler. You know, if we skip ahead, this entire fight is really just a comedy of errors. And, you know, we keep on going. You don't need to watch anymore. But yeah, needless to say, Tafa's very, very weak off his back. So I wanted to show you all that footage just because a lot of people are kind of dubbing this as a classic striker versus grappler matchup, when in actual fact, based on what I've seen, I think Juan Adams is the better striker. So from a stylistic point of view and from a technical point of view, this is a dream matchup for Juan Adams. He's got a massive advantage when it comes to grappling. Should have a decent advantage when it comes to striking as well. He's also the more experienced fighter, and he's got a big size advantage. And also, obviously, one of Adams' weaknesses throughout his career has been his cardio. But based on the limited footage we've got available, where those fights from Tafa have gone into the second round, it doesn't look like Tafa's got the best gas tank either. Although I accept, if he's now training full-time at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand, it might look a lot better. So when we talk about this fight, at this point you're probably thinking, well, if you look at the odds on this fight, we've got Juan Adams. He's currently around about, we'll call it an average of say 1.42. If we get the implied probability calculator up, 1.42, you know, it's minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. You know, you're probably thinking, well, what's the problem, man? Like, why aren't you telling us straight away to jump on betting Adams, right? And it's really because there are a lot of red flags with Adams that are difficult to quantify. There are a lot of red flags here. So in order to get any value on Adams, you'd want to be giving him around about a 75% chance of winning this fight to get any value. Now, there's no way, based on what I've shown you can bet Tafa. Not a chance. But the question becomes, can you bet Juan Adams is such a big favourite? Because remember, in a heavyweight fight, everyone carries knockout power, right? It only takes one big shot to land to put your opponent away. And that's the challenge here. The big challenge when it comes to Juan Adams is trying to weigh up how much these how much these red flags within the X factors impact what chance you give him of winning. So that you can kind of come with me on this decision-making process, I want to take you through each of the red flags that exist with Juan Adams so that you can make your own mind up whether you think he's worth a bet or not. Because remember, this is a great stylistic matchup for him, but the odds do reflect that, right? He's a big favourite. So, the first red flag that we need to explore is, I mean, obviously there's two red flags here. The first one, which I didn't even realise until I hunted for this clip to show you a video of him talking about partying, is that his eyesight is actually very bad. So listen to this and see straight from the horse's mouth what Juan Adams is saying about what it's like for, you know, when he steps into the octagon to compete. Check this out.
I didn't have my contacts in at all, so that threw me off a little bit. Not being able to see, I just found out before this fight that you're not allowed to fight with contacts in, so I didn't wear them for this one. and it threw me off a little bit. But
how bad's your vision that would mess you up?
I wear toric lenses, and it's minus 275 in both eyes.
Oh, wow.
I have astigmatism, so it's pretty bad.
Did you ever think of getting LASIK?
Yeah, I can finally afford it after this fight, so that's when it's going to happen.
So when you're in there, when you're looking at him, is he just all blurry to you?
Yeah, he's all blurry. All I see is he's got a real big head and a real big gut, so that's what I focused on, and that's all there is to it.
You got to get that LASIK, man. It's like this is a no-brainer for you.
Yeah. You know, that's why it's hard for me to make eye contact sometimes. You know, I was trying to look at the person in the middle.
So you're out of the first round for the first time in a while. What do you think?
So that's obviously a big deal, right? We've just spoken about, you know, how every single person at heavyweight carries knockout power. You know, Tafa's a big guy. He's training with, you know, decent strikers every day in Mark Hunt and Tai Tuivasa. He's tough, right? He's got that Maori blood, right? He's a tough dude. And if Juan Adams can't see those shots coming because his vision is not great, that's a huge red flag for me. Now, Juan Adams said after this fight, it was all the way back in December 2018, he said that he was going to use the money he earned from this fight to get LASIK surgery. But who knows, man? We don't know if he's had the surgery or not. If you do know if he's had the surgery, I tried to find out for myself online. I couldn't find the answer. If you do know if Adams has had this LASIK surgery, please leave a comment below and let me know. I would love to get your thoughts on it. But that's obviously a red flag. If Juan Adams can't see these shots coming from Tafa, he could be in quite a lot of trouble. But there's a second red flag in this video, which we will just skip ahead to and just listen to what Juan Adams has got to say here about his lifestyle outside of mixed martial arts.
Like I said, man, it's pretty well known. I love to party. I like to have fun. You know, I go out a lot. So Taco Bell is first stop after here, and then I got a whole box, like 4 or 5 boxes of Little Debbie's up in my room right now. So I can't wait.
Is the partying something you might have to dial back on a little bit?
Definitely. So last time we partied, I partied for about 6 weeks after that one. This time I'll give it 2 weeks. Go from there. You know, I had kind of went on a toilet pipe. I had a few ladies in my DMs from across the country. After Contender Series, I had more money than I had in a while, so I took some trips. Is what it is. This time I won't do that. I've got a girlfriend, so no toilet pipe, and I'm just gonna be chilling.
What do you make of the heavyweight division landscape?
So, if you go back throughout Juan Adams' career, in all of his interviews, he's very, very open, which is what I like. It's a sign of inexperience, really, because when you see these more experienced fighters that are used to dealing with the media, they don't give a lot away. Juan Adams does. He's talking about his eyesight being bad. He's talking about injuries. He's talking about, you know, bad training camps. He's talking about all kinds of things, man, and he's been very open since the beginning about how he has a crazy lifestyle. There he's talking about eating junk food, you know, partying, drinking, sleeping around. And if you go back throughout Juan Adams' career, it's kind of like a trend where before every single fight, he's kind of like, you know, in the past, I've lost fights because I haven't taken things too seriously. I've eaten a load of shit. Haven't trained that hard. I haven't been able to find training partners, etc. But now everything's good. I've cut out the junk food. I've improved my diet. Yeah, he says this like the same cycle. He was saying all this kind of stuff before his last fight against Greg Hardy. And yet he's still saying the same thing over and over again. It's kind of like if you keep saying it, it must still somewhat be an issue for you. But Juan Adams has taken some serious steps in this camp. You know, he is from Houston, and this event is taking place in Houston, so he'll have home advantage on his side for this fight. But he has taken the massive step of moving down to New Mexico to train at Jackson Wink MMA full-time. He's currently living full-time in their dorms. Here we can see him in a picture with John Jones, and there's another one of him here. So that is a huge step, because in the past, you know, leading up to his other fights where he was talking about making these changes, it was always with him, you know, making these changes but still living and training in Texas, whereas now he has actually taken himself away from that, go train in a completely different city, different gym, different training partners and everything. So this is just a little clip here from a great interview with Mike Heck, where Adams talks a little bit about why he decided to make the switch to Jackson's MMA. what changes we're likely to see from him, and how he's feeling going into this fight. So just check this out, guys.
Able to corner me in addition to Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn.
Why Jackson?
Sorry, guys, we has some buffering. Give me 2 secs. Just refresh that.
Lots of big names have come out of all the gyms.
Any of my other coaches, and I'm actually really happy that one of them will be able to corner me in addition to Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn.
Why Jackson Wink out of all the gyms? I know Jackson Wink has a long lineage of history. They've, lots of champions. Obviously, John Jones is there. He's a champion. Lots of big names have come and gone from that gym over the years. It's just there's a legacy behind Jackson Wink, but there's so many other gyms out there. What drew you to Jackson Wink out of everybody else?
Part of it was, living in the gym. I wake up in the morning and, when you live away from the gym, there's that temptation to kind of snooze in a little bit, show up late to practice or skip a practice, so to speak. Here, I don't have that. And also, just the stable of guys they have here, my biggest complaint was bodies, right? So here we've got Devin Clark, we've got John Jones, there's Christian Edwards. On top of that, then we've got Joel Bauman, who fights at 185, 205. And then there's 2 other pro heavyweights here. Dontel Mays is here. Then we've got Davion Franklin, who's a pro for Bellator. And on top of that, there's a couple of other amateur heavyweights, but they're still at all the classes and things like that. So just the bodies alone, the access to the coaches, lots of access to coaches, lots of access to bodies, better looks at sparring and rolling and everything. So all of that factored into the equation.
Outside of the camp and the geographic part of it, what do you think is the biggest change that you've seen in yourself so far?
Definitely mentality-wise. I've come out here. I'm a lot more business-centric out here. There's not as many distractions out here either. When you're training in your hometown, you've got everybody asking for some of your time, and then you feel bad for not being able to do it. It can be as simple as one of your buddies saying, "Hey, I'm out at a bar tonight, and a lot of these people don't believe I know you. They want to meet you." So you go out there, it might only be 20, 30 minutes, but it's still draining. It still drains some of your energy. And out here, I've been out twice in the last 3 months, once for my birthday and once one of my buddies was kind of down, so we took him out to dinner and everything. But that's been it out here. And so the lack of distraction, the increase in focus, and there's a lot less noise for me, all that extra chirping, from different sources. When you go out and everybody thinks they know something about fighting and you're sitting there and you can't really just leave. You got to just sit there and listen to people that don't know anything about what you do, trying to tell you how to do your job. There's a lot less of that out here. So that's been a big difference. My mindset is a lot different, and I'm just happier.
I was just going to say, do you wake up and just feel better, like some weight's been lifted off your shoulders since you've made this move?
So that's Juan Adams talking a little bit about his move to Jackson Wink. So this fight for me, man, I mean, Juan Adams is so tempting, right? Very, very tempting. If we look at the odds, they've been consistently declining for a while now. And money just starting to come in on him late. And it's one of those things where when you look at the odds, I mean, you can't bet Tafa. Let's just forget about Tafa. He's got too many big holes. He's a young guy. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. But based on what we've seen, no one can bet him. So the question becomes, can you bet on Adams here? And I don't know. I don't know. I'm still making my mind up on this one because I would never usually bet a heavyweight at these odds because, like I say, it only takes one shot to land. Everyone carries knockout power at heavyweight. Anything can happen, right? But you are, if you bet Adams and he wins, getting a 42% return on your money, which is a very good return. Now, we know stylistically this is a great matchup for Adams. The only asterisk that goes next to that is the fact that we haven't seen that much from Tafa over the last, 3 years. So we don't really know a lot about him. And he could have improved a tremendous amount since those fights we've watched from him. But there's nothing too scary in the footage we've seen which would give Adams a problem. So the real problem with Cap in this fight becomes, how do you quantify Adams' X factors in terms of his vision, in terms of his lifestyle, in terms of his mentality, in terms of his fight IQ? We know he slows down as the fight goes on. That's a lot more difficult. But there's no doubt that Adams ticks virtually every box you could want when you bet on a fighter. The only X factors are him as a person. So it's up to you whether you bet Adams or not. I can't make it any clearer than that. The footage doesn't lie. But like I say, boys, I always say there are risk factors with every single bet you will place. And you have to weigh up whether you're happy to take on the risk factors you see from Adams and are willing to bet a heavyweight as such a big favourite. I still don't know what I'm going to do on this one, boys. I still haven't fully made my mind up. The odds are declining. There's not been a massive difference in the odds. But I've got to make my decision soon because his odds continue to get worse. And if they drop down below 1.40 minus 250 across the board, that ship has probably sailed, right? So I hope you appreciate us going a little bit deeper on this fight. And I probably usually would on a fight like that. But there's a lot to unpack here, a lot to think about. And I know it's a fight a lot of you are interested in. So with that, boys, let's get into the second fight that I want to talk about today, which is going to be Antonio Arroyo versus Trevin Giles. Now, you'll often hear me say in my videos that it's very, very dangerous to use statistics to make betting decisions on MMA for three main reasons. The first reason is that fighters are always improving. So if you are looking at stats on a fighter, those stats have usually accrued over a very, very good amount of time. So if you're judging a fighter's stats from, data that was accumulated from 2-3 years ago, well, that data might not be useful anymore because they may have tightened up their weaknesses and improved to the point where, that data doesn't mean anything. For example, say when a fighter first came into the UFC, their takedown defense was really bad and they got taken down a bunch of times in their first 4 fights, which makes their takedown defense statistic look really bad. But then say they improve their takedown defense dramatically, you might still be judging them on having bad takedown defense when you look at the stats. But in actual fact, they've tightened it up, and vice versa, right? Fighters might decline. Fighters might have not gone knocked down in 15 fights in their career. They might have an amazing chin, but then their chin is gone. So over the last 2 or 3 fights, they start to get knocked down and hurt a lot. But you think they've got, a very, very good chin because their knockdown ratio is super good because of the amount of fights they've had. You guys get the point I'm saying. The second reason is that fighters don't spend enough time in the cage to accrue valuable data. So if you take a look at sports like football or baseball or cricket, this season, players and teams spend hours and hours and hours and hours of time on the pitch racking up data that we can evaluate. Whereas in MMA, fighters spend a very, very small amount of time in the cage compared to other sports. So the data is just completely useless. It doesn't mean anything because they're not spending enough time doing enough repetitions for it really to be meaningful data to work with. The third reason why stats are pretty much useless in MMA when it comes to making MMA betting decisions on them is because fighters face so many different styles. So for example, if a fighter has faced a disproportionately high number of grapplers that have tied them up, forced them to work in the clinch, taken them down, then their average strikes landed per round might be really low compared to someone that's fought a lot of strikers. So you might think, this dude, he lands more strikes on average per round, he's probably going to outstrike this dude. When in actual fact, it's the styles of opponents they faced which has kind of played with the stats. So I'm not a big fan of using stats when it comes to betting on MMA, but I do think everything has an application, right? Everything can be used as a tool to make better decisions. And I think the real use case for stats is where you think you've spotted a potential strength or weakness when you study the footage of a fighter, and then when you actually go and look at the stats, that can confirm your initial thoughts, or it might not confirm it, and you might have a little bit more investigating to do. But when you watch Trevin Giles, there is a major weakness in his overall skill set, which will always get him into trouble unless he tightens it up, and the stats do show that. So a big problem with Trevin Giles is that he's incredibly passive. He just doesn't really land much, and he doesn't really do a very good job of putting his stamp on rounds, which is something that may not cost him in this fight, because he will have hometown advantage. Home advantage is going to be huge for him because he is a full-time police officer in Houston. This event is taking place in Houston. I mean, we touched on it with Juan Adams having home advantage. I didn't go into too much detail because I don't expect that fight to go the distance. But it is a big deal here because this fight is quite likely to go the distance. And with Giles being a police officer in Houston, home advantage is going to be huge, right? First responders, the military, it's not that much of a big deal in the United Kingdom, but I know in the United States people are crazy for first responders. People are super passionate about the military. Bellator always make a big deal out of it. And historically, Texas judges are extremely biased towards Texan fighters, right? There's a long history of that. So if this fight does go the distance, it's going to be very difficult for Arroyo to win unless he completely dominates, right? It's going to be hard for him to win a decision in Giles' hometown. With him being a first responder, home advantage is going to be huge. But if you look at the stats, it does back up how passive Giles is. So this fight is actually a good example of why stats can be misleading, because it does show that Giles only landed 3 strikes in round 1, 4 strikes in round 2, and 1 strike in round 3. But that's because that was a predominantly grappling-based fight, right? But if we move on, we look at his fight against Zach Cummins. He only landed 13 strikes in round 1, 9 strikes in round 2, and 9 strikes in round 3. It's not good, boys. It is a super low level of strikes, and he just doesn't really put his stamp on things. This fight is a huge red flag because there's no urgency. Zach Cummins isn't a particularly tricky striker. I know he's a southpaw, but he really will just stand in front of you. He's not that fast, not that technical, and Giles just couldn't pull the trigger, and the stats completely show that. If we look at his other fight against Antonio Braga Neto, the stats look a little bit better here, but again, if you read between the lines and you know what's going on, it's really not that impressive at all. So when Antonio Braga Neto was fresh in round 1, Giles only landed 12 strikes, which is, again, a really low volume of strikes. And then his volume picked up in the second and third, but this is because Neto's got really bad cardio and he slowed down bad in the second and third, which made it easier for Giles to open up. But this first round and the fight against Zach Cummins tell the story really with Trevin Giles and how passive he is. And I hate betting on passive fighters because they leave you in a situation where if you've bet them, they're just not showing any urgency in the fight. They're not putting their foot down. They're not putting their stamp on rounds. And you're watching them feeling so frustrated that they're not doing more. That is exactly the kind of fighter that Giles is. In terms of the fighting style from Giles, he's predominantly a boxer. And he's also like a single shot striker with quite a limited range of attacks. And we'll talk about this with Dominic Reyes a bit more later on. But Giles doesn't really have a very big arsenal of attacks to trouble his opponent. All he tends to throw is a jab, and if he sees an opening after throwing the jab, he'll follow up with a power punch after that to kind of like follow up, depending on if his opponent's guard is split off the jab or if he sees an opening, if he sees an angle to land something. But other than that, doesn't bring much to the table. And if you do your homework on Giles, if Araujo is prepared for Giles, he's got a very predictable style because as soon as he lands the jab, a power strike may be coming. So if you just start to slip backwards, he's not really going to cause you too much of a problem. Giles on the ground is quite a strange one because he's super green, but he is quite heavy from top position. But if you put him on his back, he's very, very weak off his back. But Giles is all boxing, really, but low volume of strikes, quite predictable, doesn't really throw a very wide range of strikes. Araujo, on the other hand, has incredible kicks. Amazing kicks. This dude is a kicker, man, and his kicks are devastating. He's got fight-ending kicks. He's a nightmare. But the difference with this dude is he doesn't really have any boxing at all. His hand speed is very slow, almost to the point where at times it's like he's fighting underwater. So this is a real messy fight for betting. Like, I really, really would recommend that you pass on this fight from a betting point of view, because if it stays standing, Giles is the better boxer, but Araujo's got fight-ending kicks. So it's difficult to gauge, like, who's going to get the edge striking, especially because Giles doesn't throw a very high volume of strikes. So it's difficult standing. And on the ground is tricky because both guys are weak off their back. But Araujo has shown flashes of pretty decent grappling. Now, before you fly down to the comments to tell me I'm completely wrong because he looked dreadful on the ground against Andre Muniz in his UFC debut, just bear in mind that Muniz is a much higher level grappler than Trevin Giles. And, you know, if you go back and watch Araujo's fights against Stephen Reitman on the Contender Series, you know, any of these fights, you can see that this guy knows what he's doing on the ground. I think this guy is a much higher level than Giles on the ground. So there's even a possibility that if Araujo is struggling standing, he may look to take this fight to the ground where he can have a lot of success. And I mean, if we look at Trevin Giles' last fight, this guy is a pure striker, where I always use the analogy of a moth getting sucked into the bug zapper, you know, like with Justin Tafa doing the opposite of what he should be doing. Trevin Giles fell into that trap against Gerald Meerschaert. For whatever reason, he decided to repeatedly take Meerschaert down, and it got him into a lot of trouble. So even if Araujo, you know, doesn't take this fight to the ground, the fight might end up on the ground if Giles initiates the takedowns, and then on the ground I would give Araujo quite a significant advantage based on what I've seen. So it's a horrible fight for betting. I really, really would urge you to pass on this one. Like, I feel like I made a big mistake in 2019 in when I was talking about a lot of these fights, and I would like summarize, I would come across as maybe a little bit confrontational and maybe a bit condescending in kind of like making fun of people for placing certain bets, and that wasn't my intention. I want to get away from all that. So I'm just going to tell you exactly how I see it from my research and just hope that you can use that information to go and make the best decision for you. Guess what I'm trying to say is I've seen a lot of people on Giles this week, and I would just urge you to just maybe go back and have another look at the footage, man, to be sure. Because for me, I don't see a strong position on this fight. If I were you, I would pass. Both guys close to even money. You look at Trevin Giles, he's around about a 1.72 favourite, right? Are those about the average odds? Giles about a call it 1.74, a little bit better than that. 1.74 minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. So to get any value here, you want to be capping him at over 60%. I don't know about that. For me, this is much more of a 50-50 fight. If anything, I'd slightly side with Araujo. But the home advantage for Giles does make me very nervous in betting Araujo. If we look at the odds on Araujo, currently around about a 2.15 underdog, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. Again, to get any value on Araujo here, you'd want to be capping him at better than 50%, and I don't know if you can do that. I'm not seeing a great deal on this fight. If you're thinking of betting this fight, I would really put a lot of thought into it. Go back and watch some footage, because I just do not see a strong position there at all. So let's move on to the next fight, which I believe is probably the best fight on this card from a technical point of view, right? There's quite a lot of low-level fighters on this card. The main events are not that interesting to me, but Dan Ige versus Bektic, two really talented young fighters who are on the up and up, right? They're improving. They got bright futures in the sport. It's a competitive matchup. It's an interesting matchup. So let's get into it. So this fight, again, it's an interesting one because I feel like where I've been looking online this week, there are two camps of people with this fight, right? This is probably one fight, this week, which has divided the most amount of opinions between people, where, looking on Twitter, there are some people that are really adamant that Ige is going to win this, and they're betting Ige, and they're in the Ige camp. And then you've got the other camp, adamant that Bektic is a good bet, and they're in the Bektic camp, right? You've got two different camps of people. And I think why you have these two different camps is that both Ige and Bektic have huge weaknesses. They both have massive weaknesses, and they're both well positioned to exploit those weaknesses. In terms of Ige's got big weaknesses that we're going to talk about, and Bektic has the skills to exploit them, and Bektic has weaknesses that Ige has the skills to exploit. So I think what we're seeing with these two different camps of people is they may be underestimating the significance of the fighter's weakness that they're betting, and maybe it's kind of ignoring it and not really addressing the fact that the opponent is quite well positioned to exploit that weakness. So I'm going to explain to you what I mean, and then see how you feel about it. I'd love to see your thoughts on this particular fight, because I'm sure a lot of you watching do feel very strongly about this fight, because I've seen a ton of people betting this online. So leave a comment below and let me know what you think of my perspective on this one. So let's start with Dan Ige, who's probably the easiest one to break down. So Dan Ige is a submission grappler, but for some strange reason just has absolutely no wrestling. Like, this guy is very easy to take down, and he's very weak off his back, which is so strange, because when he's in control of the grappling exchanges, he looks quite dangerous. It's so bizarre. It's almost like he's taken tons of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, done tons of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, and not necessarily spent that much time wrestling, which is a huge problem, because Mirsad Bektic is a very, very strong wrestler, and Ige has absolutely nothing for Bektic if Bektic is in dominant positions. So what I mean by that is Bektic can easily take Ige down at the beginning of every round and win this fight 30-27. Like, Ige has nothing for him really when it comes to grappling. Ige's so weak off his back. Like, to see exactly what I mean, go and watch his fights against Kevin Aguilar, and in particular Jordan Griffin, because Ige spends so much time, losing position, chasing long shot submissions, giving up weak takedowns, spending too much time on his back. Bektic is light years ahead of Aguilar and Griffin when it comes to wrestling. If Griffin and Aguilar can put Ige on his back and control him, Bektic can completely dominate. Like, this fight could be like a 30-26 beatdown for Bektic if he fights smart, takes this fight to the ground, and just cruises and dominates Ige from top position. So you're probably thinking, well, if Bektic has got the skills to exploit Ige and dominate him to such a big degree, why aren't you telling me to bet on Bektic? Well, the clue is in Dan Ige's nickname, Dynamite Dan Ige. This dude has nuclear missiles in his hands. It's unreal. Like, this dude reminds me of Nico Price. Not because of fighting style or anything like that, but because he just has abnormal power in his hands, to the extent where when Ige lands on his opponent, they have this look of panic in their eyes, like they can't believe he hits that hard. And he doesn't have the best striking, doesn't have the best technique, but when he lands, man, he gets people's attention to the point that, if he lands standing, he's going to do big damage. And more importantly, in the context of this fight, this guy just has devastating ground and pound. Like, devastating. And that's a little bit of a concern, a little bit of a risk factor if you want to bet Bektic, because say, for example, Bektic does get caught in a scramble or slips on a banana skin, ends up on the bottom. Ige is so aggressive with his ground and pound from top position. Based on what we've seen from Bektic in his fight against Josh Emmett, I could definitely see Ige getting a stoppage from top position through ground and pound. And that brings me on to the concerns I have over betting Mirsad Bektic. Because betting on MMA is all about working with incomplete sets of information. Quite often we don't have all the information, and we've got to kind of like weigh everything up, right? It's like with the, with the Juan Adams situation, is he really taking his career seriously now? He's training at Jackson Wink, or is it more just talk for the media like we've heard in the past, like going into the Greg Hardy fight? There's a big gap in information with Bektic where I feel like I might be overly harsh with him. But at the end of the day, I've seen enough to make me a little bit concerned about his chin. So I don't want to say that Bektic has a bad chin, because we don't have much evidence of that being true. But if you go back and watch the Elkins fight, before the head kick put him away, he did get dinged off a punch, and he was semi-out already before the kick landed. And it's kind of like Elkins isn't known for his knockout power, right? I know that Bektic kind of caught the shot against the cage, he didn't see it coming, but it was just a little bit weird the way that third round played out. And then in his last fight against Josh Emmett, he got dropped by a jab. And you're like, you know what? It fucking happens, right? Emmett hits like a truck. He's fast. Bektic might not have seen the jab coming. He was coming forward, walked onto the jab. He got dropped, tried to recover, couldn't fight through it. The fight was over. So it's really, really harsh for me to say Bektic is chinny. And I'm aware of how harsh it is. But I just have this feeling, based on what we've seen, that this guy might not be able to take a shot. Because the nature of the loss against Emmett, if you go back and watch it, is very, very suspicious. Because he gets dropped off a jab, and he's trying to recover, and he just, like, he's not with it, man. He gets dropped off a jab, and he's kind of out. And Emmett just swarms him, gets the job done. And that's quite significant, because Ige is devastating on the ground with ground and pound. Like, if he hurts Bektic goes to the ground, Bektic's not going to be able to recover, man, based on what I saw against Emmett, because the shots that Ige will land from top position will put him away, like the follow-up shots. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, man, because when you see a fighter get hurt, I always use the example against I always use the example of Jose Aldo against Max Holloway, right? Remember when Max hurt Aldo? And Aldo was just trying so hard to fight through it on the ground, doing whatever he could to fight through it. But Holloway overwhelmed him and he couldn't. And if we even think about Jeremy Stephens, when Jose Aldo hurt him and Yair Rodriguez hurt him, Stephens did everything within his power till the final second to fight through being hurt, right? And that's what you want. When you bet a fighter, you want to see them have that determination to fight through being hurt, to fight through anything. I don't see that with Bektic. When he got dropped off the jab with Emmett, he was kind of done. And that's a bit of a concern, because it wasn't a massive shot that landed. And Ige, if he has you hurt, the one thing Ige does great is he goes for the kill, man. And he doesn't let you off the hook. And he hits like a truck. And also, Bektic's striking defense is a bit sketchy. He comes forward in straight lines, chin up high and exposed. He's there to be hit. And like I say, Ige doesn't have the best technique, but he hits like a truck. And because he's not worried about being taken down, because he's a grappler, he wants to be on the ground, that means he can open up a little bit with his strikes without worrying so much about the takedown from Bektic. So this is a real horrible fight to call. I was just going to kind of say, Ige trains in Vegas, yada yada. He's the personal assistant of Ali Abdelaziz, although Ali Abdelaziz is giving him more time these days to focus full time on MMA as opposed to handling his client base, which is why Ige's cardio's probably improved quite a bit over the last few fights. I was just going to say Mirsad Bektic, trains at TriStar with some of the best fighters in the world. TriStar fighters always show up with solid game plans. So, I'm sure Bektic has a nice game plan in store for Ige. But really, in terms of the major meaningful analysis on this fight, I feel what I've just said about both guys is the most important factors to consider. So if we look at this fight from a betting perspective, I personally have no desire to bet Dan Ige here at all. I think a bet on Dan Ige is not possible. And again, I know many people watching this will be on Ige in this fight because a lot of people feel strongly about this fight. And again, I don't want these videos to be confrontational. I just want to let you know where I'm coming from. All I'm saying is there is no footage that exists on Earth in this universe that you can show me which proves Ige can keep this fight standing. Bektic can absolutely 10,000% take Ige down, dominate him for 3 rounds and win this fight 30-25. And there's nothing Ige can do about it. His takedown defense is too bad. He's too weak off his back. So if you look at the odds on Ige, currently around about an average, like I say, 2.15 plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. To bet Ige in this fight, you have to give him quite a bit better than 50% chance of winning, and you just cannot do that. Like, I don't care how much you know about MMA. I don't care what you've seen in the footage. Like, I don't care, how much how much work you've done, how much time you've put into this fight. You cannot give Ige a better than 50% chance of winning. You can't even really get to 55 or 60 because he can't defend the takedown, and Bektic is such a strong wrestler. On the flip side, if you look at the odds on Bektic, this is a much more difficult decision to make because the odds on Bektic aren't bad, right? 1.74 minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. In these fights where they're very tricky to call, they could go either way. Both guys have got big holes. Both guys have got amazing strengths. We're often left in these, underdog or pass situations. But I actually feel like this is one of those unique situations where if you do want to bet this fight, you have to go with Bektic. And I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Bektic's odds, man, because if Bektic's odds did start to improve, we tend to see a lot of line movement on fight day. We haven't seen so much on this card because the card's not great, but he opened up at 1.95. If we started to see Bektic's odds, creep back up towards 1.83 minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%, starting to get into the range for me where Bektic becomes a potential bet. At the current odds, it's tricky for me because the way I look at this is Bektic is reckless. He is a wild man. He does love a scrap. And the chances of Ige landing something within 15 minutes are quite high. But stylistically, if Bektic does fight smart, it should be an easy night's work for him. So I'm really torn on this one, man. Like, I definitely, guys, honestly, please, do your own research, but I don't see how you could find value in Ige. I really don't. Bektic, more complicated. I don't love the odds, but it is an easy stylistic matchup for him. I'm probably going to pass at these odds, but I'm keeping an eye on this one to see if they improve. Let me know in the comments, though, boys, how you're feeling about this matchup, because I know a bunch of people online are going to bet this fight. God, my hair's gone all crazy. A bunch of people online are going to bet that fight. I've seen people debate Ige Bektic all week. That's my thoughts on it. I feel quite strongly that I'm reading that fight correctly, and because of the big weaknesses both guys have got, because their opponent is well positioned to exploit that weakness, I just don't see any strong positions to put my money, and you boys know I'm always looking for the strong positions. So the next fight that I want to get into in today's video is going to be Ewell against Jonathan Martinez. So it shouldn't actually take us too long to get through this one. Ewell is one of these guys that is very good at being the hammer, but not so good at being the nail. And what I mean by that is, when he's allowed to dictate the pace of the fight, dictate the range in which it takes place, dictate the pace, he's very good. So for example, if you stand right in the middle of the octagon with him in kickboxing range where he can pick his shots, he looks absolutely amazing. But as soon as you take that control away from him, his striking defense goes out the window. He becomes, like I say, very hittable, not that dangerous offensively, really struggles to get his strikes off, his volume falls off a cliff, and he really struggles. Marlon Vera and Nathaniel Wood really wrote the blueprint on how to beat Ewell, because this guy, he just can't deal with pressure. And I don't mean pressure of fighting in the UFC, I mean that pressure fighting style where guys come forward, take your space away, and force you to fight in a phone booth. Now, what's interesting about that is Jonathan Martinez doesn't really have that style, but he also kind of does. MMA betting's so complicated, right? What I mean by that is, in Martinez's last fight against Ping Wang Liu, we saw Ping Wang on the outside, Martinez coming forward, applying a lot of pressure, trying to utilise that pressure fighting style. But when Martinez got into a range where, you know, he's close enough to let his hands go and start to land on Ping Wang, he did a great job of putting that pressure on him, but then he just didn't let his hands go. So he got like 50% of the way there. He had the footwork. He did a good job of cutting the cage off. He did a good job with the pressure. There was just not enough output there from him. And I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to beat Ewell. Because obviously if you don't land, if you don't pull the trigger, you're not scoring points. But that's the difference really, isn't it? Where you've seen Ewell against Marlon Vera and Nathaniel Wood. That's the difference. Vera and Wood did pull the trigger. And they did hurt him. Now, I've got a weird feeling about this fight, man. And the weird feeling is Jonathan Martinez, 25 years old. He's not training at this small gym anymore. He's gone to train at, you know, Fortis MMA, which is one of the best gyms in MMA at the moment. He's got good coaches behind him. If the blueprint is being written to beat Andre Ewell, and he's already shown evidence in his last fight that he's trying to build that pressure fighting style. You know, this fight was quite a long time ago, back in July. He's only 25 years old. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. Will he now be able to go one step further in this matchup against Andre Ewell? And as well as apply that pressure fighting style where he gets into the range to land these strikes, will he actually then land them this time? That's what I'm interested in here. It's one where it's a fight where, based on past performances, you'd think Andre Ewell is actually a good bet here, but I have a feeling we're going to see a different side to Jonathan Martinez. And there was one specific thing that he did throughout his fight with Ping Wang Liu, which is a bit of a risk for Ewell. So if you go back and watch that fight against Liu, he did something he's never done before. So what he would do is he would apply a lot of pressure to kind of bait Liu into opening up. And then when Liu would come forward, he would time this knee right up the middle. And he was really looking for it, man. He was really looking for it. And that's the knee that eventually knocked Liu out in the third round. He eventually got to it in the third round. And we hadn't seen that from him before. This was something that he'd built on in this fight against Liu. Now that's significant because when you pressure Ewell, he starts to throw a lot of goofy counter strikes and goofy shots from different weird angles where he'll kind of like overextend himself and duck his head down and try to land body shots with like his head in awkward positions. And he puts his head right in the position where Martinez could land one of these knees. So Ewell is actually really, really susceptible to the one technique that was the critical success factor for Martinez in his last fight, which I find super interesting actually, because if Martinez can build on what he did against Liu and open up a little bit more and force Ewell into coming forward and trying to back him up recklessly, these knees could be absolutely huge for Martinez, and I could actually see him knocking Ewell out. But the way I look at this fight is, based on past performances, Ewell should win this. And he's one of these fighters where his odds have been improving all week gradually, so there's been no rush to betting him. I'm waiting to see what the odds do. Ewell is on my radar as a potential bet. I haven't pulled the trigger on him yet, but if you take a look at the odds, currently around about an average of 1.81, which is minus 123 for an implied probability of 55%. I slightly lean towards Ewell, like, not by a massive amount because he doesn't instill much confidence in me. You know, low-level ground game, although it shouldn't matter because Martinez a low-level ground game as well, but it's the low-level ground game, struggles against pressure fighters. He is wide open to big counters when he kind of sloppily tries to back his opponent up. But there are a lot of things that Ewell does well in terms of if Martinez does try and get into a kickboxing match with him and doesn't pressure Ewell and actually land, if he doesn't pull the trigger, if he doesn't let his hands go, this becomes a really good fight for Ewell. So it's a weird one where, based on past performances, Ewell should take this. But when you look at how much Martinez has changed from the Sukumtar fight to the Buren fight, from the Buren fight to the Lou fight, I'm expecting him to improve another order of magnitude from where he was against Lou, now that he's training at a much better gym. And with the game plan being written on how to beat Ewell by Nathaniel Wood and Marlon Vera, I have a feeling Martinez is going to have some tricks up his sleeve. And for that reason, you want to make sure you're getting a really good deal on Ewell. So it's a bit of a messy fight. I would not bet Martinez based on what we've seen in the past, right? It's not a good stylistic matchup for Martinez based on his fighting style historically, but he is a young fighter that's emerging. I think we could see a different side to him this weekend. Let me know what you think in the comments below, boys. And I'm definitely thinking about betting Ewell, but I haven't made my mind up. So let's get into the next fight before we get into the main event. Jesus, we are smashing through these fights, boys. The next fight that I want to talk about is going to be Miles Johns against Mario Bautista. And this is another fight that I am surprised that a lot of people are very interested in this one. I'm not entirely sure why. But yeah, a lot of people seem bang up for this fight from a betting point of view. So let's get into it. So, where do we begin? For me, there's two huge factors. That's not true. There are two huge unknowns in this fight, which for me make it impossible to predict. I feel like without the answers to these questions, there's no way you can feel confident in either of these guys, right? There's two major factors, two major unknowns. The first major factor and the major unknown is kind of an unknown, but it's also kind of a big factor, is that Mario Bautista is a super slow starter. If you go back and watch his fights against Jinsu Son or against Juan Pablo Gonzalez, you will see that this guy doesn't really get going until midway through the second round. He's a very, very, very slow starter. And that could be a big problem in this fight because Miles Johns is from Texas. He's going to have home advantage on his side. We know that home advantage is huge in Texas. And, you know, if Miles Johns wins round one because Bautista starts slow and then Bautista doesn't quite get going until the midway point of the second round, Johns might have already got the first two rounds in the bag before Bautista gets going, and by then it's too late for him to do anything about it and Miles Johns wins the decision. So the first kind of X factor to take into consideration is if Bautista starts slow like he usually does, it's going to be difficult for him to win a decision in Texas against a guy with home advantage. On the other hand, you know, this is only going to be his third fight in the UFC. He's still very young at 26 years old. If he does start a bit faster in this fight and he does perform in the first round like he was able to perform in the second and third round against Jinsu Son, Miles Johns is going to have his hands full. Because if Bautista performs in round one like he did again in the second and third against Son, he will have a gigantic advantage when it comes to striking over Miles Johns. Now, it might not matter if Bautista only gets going in round two, because like I say, by then it might be too late for him to get the fight back. But Johns will have trouble on his hands if Bautista shows up here looking as good in round one as he did in the second and third against Son. Go back and watch the second and third rounds of this fight to see what I mean. So that's the first kind of unknown, where we don't know how Bautista is going to look in round one. The second unknown, or the second X factor to take into consideration, is that we don't know what Bautista's like off his back, because we've never really seen him face a strong wrestler. Now, Miles Johns, it's inconclusive whether this guy is a strong wrestler or not. He reminds me a lot of Tony Gravely from last week. So last week, remember, I recommended a bet on Brett Johns. And the reason why I recommended a bet on Brett Johns is because you could tell from Tony Gravely's past fights that he just didn't have a very heavy top game. He was one of these high-level collegiate wrestlers, NCAA Division I level wrestlers, that was great at getting guys to the ground, but they hadn't quite developed their MMA grappling yet to the point where they were able to hold guys down. And we know Brett Johns is an excellent, MMA grappler, very difficult to hold down, very difficult to take down. So it was a great stylistic matchup for Brett, and he came through for us in a big way. When it comes to Miles Johns, I see a lot of the same weaknesses in Johns that I do in Gravely, in the sense that he's very athletic, he's great at getting guys to the ground, but because he's quite small at 5'7", I don't know how heavy his top game is. I don't know how effective he's going to be at holding guys down who are very good at working their way back to their feet. The problem we've got here is there's no footage of Bautista being on his back and working his way back to his feet. So it's a complete unknown. Because Gravely honey-dicked a lot of guys into betting him last week, because in his past fights, he had taken loads of his past opponents down and held him on the ground. But that was because he was facing guys that didn't know how to work their way back to their feet. Brett Johns did, and that was the difference. That's why we bet Brett Johns, right? The problem we've got is we don't know if Bautista fits into the category of person that when they get taken down, they're going to be weak off their back, they're going to allow Miles Johns to control him from top position, or where they're going to be difficult to hold down like Brett Johns was, pop back up and make Miles Johns work really hard to keep this fight on the ground. Because if the fight stays standing, the longer the fight goes, it gets real bad for Miles Johns. Bautista's boxing looked excellent in the second and third against Susan, and trust me, Susan is a much better striker than Miles Johns. So this is a real tough fight to call, boys, a real tough one, because if Bautista is difficult to hold down and comes out the gate fighting at a high pace in round one, this is a terrible matchup for Johns. Very bad. Because he won't be able to hold Bautista down, and he won't be able to win the fight striking, so it becomes a checkmate matchup for Johns. But on the other hand, if Bautista doesn't start, getting things going until the midway point of the second round, and if Bautista is weak off his back, or if he does take a long time to work his way back to his feet, well, it becomes a great matchup for Johns, right? Because he can use his takedowns to put his stamp on rounds, and by the time Bautista does work his way back to his feet, he doesn't have as much time to put points in the bag and win rounds. And another factor being, if Bautista does start slow, because he's one of these guys that needs to take a little bit of time to feel his opponent out, find his range, get confident in the striking exchanges, well, he's not going to be able to do that if Miles Johns is able to keep him on his back for a significant amount of time early in this fight. So very much like the Bektic versus Ige fight, this one could go either way. And I know there are people on both sides, there are big camps on both sides in this fight. I just do not see a strong position on this fight at all, boys, and I feel super strongly about that. I feel like if you are betting either guy here, you are putting your money in a lot of danger. And yes, it might work out for you. Your dude might come through. But I feel it would be more luck than judgment, if I'm being honest. And I don't want it, again, I don't want these videos to be confrontational like they were in 2019. I want it to be all positive, sharing knowledge, and helping each other out. But if you have bet either one of these guys, I would really consider going back, watching the footage, considering what I've said, and potentially hedging out of one of these fighters. Because if we look at the odds, currently Bautista as a slight underdog, call it, odds are around 2.10, which is plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. Well, you've got Bautista. I can't feel confident in this guy. He starts too slow. Don't know what he's like off his back. You can't bet him. But then if we look at Miles Johns, this guy is currently around about, call it, an average of 1.77 favourite, which is about minus 130 for an implied probability of 55%. In order to bet this guy, you've got to give him about a 60% chance of winning, and it's so hard to do that because if he gets the takedown and Bautista is immediately able to pop back up to his feet, Johns has got his hands full, faux show. So it's a tricky fight for betting, boys. I just don't see any value here. But let me know what you think in the comments below, man. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys have, maybe some of you guys have watched a ton of footage on both guys, and you've picked out things I've missed out on. Please let me know in the comments, man. I'm not perfect. I do miss things. So if you disagree, if you're big on Johns, if you're big on Bautista, let me know. I've seen plenty of people this week online betting both guys, feeling very strongly about it. I'm interested to know your thoughts. But now we get into the main event of the evening. Dominic Reyes against Jon Jones, which is a little bit anticlimactic because I feel like it's not that much of an interesting main event to talk about, personally. Even before researching this fight, I knew that I definitely wouldn't be betting on Jon Jones as a big favourite. If we look at his odds at the moment, he's currently around about a 1.23 favourite, which is minus 435 for an implied probability of 81%. And the reason, well, you know what? Actually, there's a reason why I won't bet Jon Jones in this fight, and it has nothing to do with his technical ability. But rather than have myself explain why I don't think Jon Jones is a good bet here, I am just going to play a clip from Brendan Schaub's podcast from this week, because I feel Brendan takes a ton of shit online from people who are really unfair to him, and I just think it's a bit naughty. I think there's so many negative people online, man. Like negativity has been getting me down over the last month I've taken online. And I don't like it when you just see loads of people bash Brendan, because he's a content creator and he's a comedian, right? It takes an incredible amount of time to research an MMA fight. I spend like 2 to 3 hours researching every single MMA fight. And this guy's a comedian. He's a content creator. He doesn't have time to dig into these fights and break them down on a really deep level. He doesn't have time to sit down and work out what guys like Juan Adams and Justin Tafa bring to the table. That is why his actual breakdowns of fights are going to be sketchy. But everyone has got something to offer, right? And what I really like about Brendan Schaub is that he gives a really good insight into mixed martial arts, on the mentality of a fighter and the psychology behind the sport. And I was feeling the same as Brendan before I actually watched this podcast, and he just did an absolutely superb job of explaining exactly how I feel. So rather than some idiot from Wales trying to kind of like blubber through and fucking butcher his explanation as to how I feel about this matchup, just listen to what Brendan's got to say here about Jon Jones, and really let me know what you think, man, about what Brendan said here, because I think it's a great point, and you don't usually hear people talk about this kind of stuff that often. So take a listen, guys.
I think Dom's that guy who's not going to show that much respect and get after him from the jump. Too many guys want to feel it out with Jon. Too many guys. And, you look at Jon's previous fights and people are like, oh, is Jon getting older? Has he lost a step? And I'm more on the end of it's hard for him to get up for these fights. It's when you've been fighting the guys that Jon has fought, when you fought, when you defend the title 13 times, when you have fought the likes of Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, Lyoto Machida, Rampage Jackson, Chael Sonnen, Alexander Gustafsson, Shogun, Ryan Bader, Brandon Vera, the who's who. When you fought all these guys and you've been on the biggest cards possible, and now you're on an ESPN Plus pay-per-view, fighting a contender, a worthy contender, a dangerous guy in Dominic Reyes, it's more of, can Jon Jones get up for this fight? It's more of Jon Jones versus Jon Jones. And that's not a knock on Dominic Reyes. That's anybody right now. Anybody. It's Jon Jones versus Jon Jones. It's where is he at mentally? If he views you as a threat, a serious threat, he's going to annihilate you. He's going to pick you apart, take you down, and make it happen. But you see what he's doing with these guys, man. Like, think about the last time he was really tested. The last time he was tested, right? DC gave him some fights, right? So DC, that UMass decision that he won. Next time he knew it was going to be a fight. What happened? Head kick, KO, third round. He knew that was going to be a fight. Alexander Gustafsson, first time they fought, didn't respect him. You have one hell of a fight, right? You win slight decision, just the slight decision. What happened in the rematch? Took him out. TKO, third round. So when John knows that you're serious, he shows up. It's John versus John. He shows up. So in this one, is he going to catch up with him? Because if it's John versus John and John's like, I can beat this guy in my sleep, man. It's not that big of a deal. And Dom is what he thinks he is and goes after him from the opening bell, John might be in trouble because Dom does have the skills. He's explosive. He's more athletic. He believes he can do it. These other guys, I don't know if they believe they can do it. But if it's John and he goes, all right, this guy's a legit threat, I got to show up, you got problems. He's the best to ever do it. Bar none. Would love to argue with anybody who wants to argue about it. I know the Mighty Mouse. I've heard the Mighty Mouse case. Remember
So I really, really, really agree with everything that Brendan said there, man. And it's something that a lot of champions have talked about over the years, right? GSP talked about it way back in the day, where he was saying it's very hard to get the belt, but it's even harder to keep the belt. Because the pressure of being a UFC champion or any kind of champion, it weighs on you. And you see fighters go through this journey, these dominant champions go through this journey where over time they become more strategic and more tactical to the point where they're just not the same anymore. So you think back to GSP, when he first went on his title run, he was blowing through guys, and then towards the end of his title run, he was starting to struggle a little bit against guys like Carlos Condit and Johnny Hendricks. The same thing happened to Jose Aldo and Anderson Silva early on in their title reign, murking guys. The longer they had the belt, though, the more passive, the more strategic, the more tactical they become, as the weight of carrying the belt became too much for them. And in recent history, we've seen examples of this, right? We've seen Rose Namajunas look relieved. She looked happy when she lost her title to Jessica Andrade. She spoke about the pressure of being a champion too much. When Jessica Andrade got knocked out by Weili Zhang, she immediately started smiling. She looked happier when she lost the belt to Weili Zhang than when she won the title against Rose Namajunas. And again, the pressure of carrying the belt, it was too much for Andrade to handle. And remember Cyborg as well, after going out and basically imploding against Amanda Nunes. On social media and in interviews shortly after the fight, she talked about feeling relieved that she had lost, relieved that she was no longer carrying the weight of being the greatest of all time and, a big champion and undefeated. She felt relieved. And, probably the most recent example I can think of is Max Holloway. Like, no matter how you feel about the fight between Holloway and Volkanovski, you can't tell me that the Holloway that we saw against Volkanovski was the same Holloway we've seen in the past. Like, he really didn't get going until the fourth round. And when the fight was over, he didn't really seem like he cared that much about losing. I mean, in the post-fight interview, Dana White said that he wants to do an immediate rematch between Volkanovski and Holloway. And then on the Joe Rogan podcast a few days later, Holloway was like, I don't even know if I want a rematch. Like, I'm just going to go on vacation. I might take a fight at lightweight. He was super casual about the whole belt thing. So I think we've got examples, a lot of examples, and probably, these are just a few. If you went and actually drilled through a lot of, long-running champions that have lost the belt and the circumstance around them losing the belt, you probably find a lot more examples than what I've just mentioned. And I feel that might be creeping in with Jon Jones, where we're starting to see him show up with these really strategic, really, tactical performances that make fights much closer than they need to be. And of course, GSP and Aldo and Anderson Silva to some extent fell into this trap. Because if we look at Jon Jones' last fight against Thiago Santos, it was so close. Like, no matter how you scored this fight, the majority of people are in agreement that there was only 1 round difference in this fight, right? Which means, Jones just won 1 round more than Santos. Now, when I researched this fight this week, I live streamed my research for this on my website. I would say there were like 30 of my members watching the live stream when I researched this fight. And I asked them all before we researched it together to watch this fight like a hawk and score it to see which way they had it. And the way that we all pretty much unanimously agreed on with scoring this fight was that Santos definitely won round 1. Round 2, total coin flip, could have gone either way. Round 3, definitely Jones. Round 4, definitely Jones. Most people had round 5 for Santos. So really, Jones kind of won this fight on a coin flip. Like, if you go back and watch the second round, you'll see what I mean, man. Very difficult fight to score. And there was no need for it to be that close, because we've seen in the past, Santos has really bad takedown offense, low-level ground game. Jones almost made it onto the Olympic wrestling team for the United States, but his girlfriend got pregnant. He had to drop out of the program, whatever. You can Google it. The point I'm trying to make is Jones almost lost his title through bad fight IQ. Because realistically, he could have taken Santos down and finished this fight in round 1 if he wanted to on the ground. Instead, took a lot of risks, fought really tactically, tried to prove a point, and it very, very nearly cost him, because this fight only ended in a split decision, right? I can't even see where it says split decision. Gotta say split decision on here. But yeah, it was a split decision. Okay, very, very close. There we go, split decision. Could have gone either way. 50-50, it was a coin toss. Jones was a coin toss away from losing his belt. So that is why I can't bet Jon Jones as a big favourite anymore. It doesn't matter who he's fighting, because you never know what version of him is going to show up. Like Brendan Schaub said, is his head still in the game? Is he motivated to turn up? So I can't bet Jon at these odds, because if you look at these average odds, 1.24, minus 417 for an implied probability of 81%. In order to get any value here, you've got to cap Jones at like 85%, which is so difficult to do, man. Reyes is dangerous. Jones is really passive and tactical these days. It's very difficult to cap a fighter in that range. You know, Jones could get flash KO'd, he could get injured, he could get disqualified. He almost got disqualified against Anthony Smith, right? Very difficult to cap him in this range. So I'm not interested in betting on Jon Jones. And I was very, very open-minded to betting Dominic Reyes here, because I like Reyes a lot. I think he's brilliant. I think he's a great fighter. But when I studied this fight, man, I actually was quite surprised by how limited Reyes' arsenal of attacks were. Really, Reyes has only got 2 weapons. He's got his inside leg kick from the southpaw stance, and his devastating head kick, which he has used to finish so many of his past opponents, right? He's only really got 2 weapons. Now, before you race to the comments and say, hang on a minute, what are you talking about? He knocked Whiteman out, he knocked OSP down, he knocked Cannonier out with his straight left. Before you run down to the comments, let me just make my point on this, and then you could decide after if you want to call me a jabroni for not respecting Reyes' boxing. But really, Reyes has only got 2 weapons, in my opinion. You know, don't fear a man with 10,000 kicks, fear a man that has thrown one kick 10,000 times, right? There's that expression. And those 2 techniques from Reyes are devastating. Like, his timing, his speed, the power he can generate on that head kick, it's outrageous. It's fucking devastating. I mean, look at his nickname. It is devastating. And Reyes' leg kicks are vicious. They are fucking vicious. They are amazing. They're fight-changing leg kicks, man. Reyes could throw a leg kick and snap Jon Jones' leg in half with one of them. He's vicious, man. He is devastating. And that last point about the leg kicks is quite significant, because when you watch Jon Jones, he doesn't have many weaknesses. One of his biggest strengths is his striking defense. He's incredibly difficult to hit. He's so difficult to hit. And when you do land on him, he's almost always either partially blocking the shot, circling away from you, blocking it, or slipping it, or at least rolling with the shot. He sees everything coming. It's so hard to land a clean head strike on Jon Jones. But the one particular strike that he is susceptible to, it's almost like he doesn't pay any attention to them at all, is leg kicks. Jon Jones just doesn't check them. He doesn't block them. Although you can really block a leg kick. But he doesn't try and slip them. He doesn't address them at all. Which is significant, because you don't want to eat too many leg kicks from Dominic Reyes. They're devastating, man. Now, a moment ago we were saying that Reyes only really has 2 weapons. And the reason why I think that's going to get him into trouble here is because Jon Jones comes into every single fight with a game plan and a strategy specifically tailored towards his opponent. So if you look at his strategy against Santos, very difficult from his strategy against Smith, very different from his strategy against Alexander Gustafsson, right? Gustafsson, lots of takedown attempts, foot on the back foot. Against Anthony Smith, lots of clinch work, right? Lots of grappling. Against Santos, just tried to control the centre of the octagon, avoid Santos' big power strikes, and just tried to chip away at him from a range where he felt safe. Different strategies. The problem that you've got is all of these guys here, even OSP, all of these guys have a lot of weapons that they could use to trouble Jon Jones. So Jon Jones's strategies and game plans for each of these opponents would have been very complicated, right? Santos, there's a lot of things you need to worry about with Santos. Devastating leg kicks, devastating body kicks, devastating head kicks, vicious knockout power in his left and right hand. He's a switch stance fighter. Same with Gustafsson, great boxer, impossible to take down, great ground game, you know what I mean? Great cardio, great chin. There's a lot to worry about. And yet Jon Jones came in with a game plan to beat all of them, even DC, right? Even all the fucking murderers row. He's had a game plan, fighting Glover in the clinch, for fuck's sake. Do you know what I'm saying? The guy's ridiculous. But he always comes in with a different game plan. Jon Jones always looks different. If you go back and watch any of his fights, he'll look different in every fight. Now, over the years, we've seen Jon Jones deal with some really difficult styles, like we say, that have thrown multiple different challenges at him. And now, in Dominic Reyes, he's taken on a guy that really only has two things that could trouble him. A leg kick, head kick. And so, even though Jon has been susceptible to the leg kick in the past, I can't help but feel that he will have done his homework on Reyes, and he will have a game plan in place to just completely neutralise those two threats. And I don't see what else Reyes can do to cause Jon a problem, which brings us nicely under the boxing, because I know many of you will be fucking angry that I said that Reyes has only got two things that he could... Two things that he does well, basically. Oh, no, he does a lot well. That's not fair. He does a lot well, but in terms of offensively, there's only really two weapons there. So let's address it, right, with the left hand that he's been able to put Cannonier away with, drop OSP, drop Weidman. Reyes is very much a single shot fighter. He doesn't really have any boxing, and when he's dropped Cannonier, Weidman, OSP with this left hand, it's always because they're stood right in front of him and they don't see it coming. It's been in a position where they're either coming forward aggressively or they're tired, and he's able to catch them flat-footed and cold. You just don't catch Jon Jones like that. It doesn't fucking happen. It just doesn't. Like, if you go back and watch Jon Jones's fights, any of them, his boxing defense, his striking defense is outrageously good. He's so difficult to hit. He sees everything coming. And a big part of that is his range, right? We know Dominic Reyes is a big boy at 6 foot tall. But Jon Jones is even bigger, 6'4", with an 84.5-inch reach. So they're both guys the same height, but Jon Jones will have a 7.5-inch reach advantage. And it's so difficult to get inside and land anything big on Jon, because he never overcommits. He sees everything coming. He takes time to find his range and settle into a rhythm. You never catch him flat-footed. And it's just like, I just don't see Reyes hurting Jon at all with his hands. I just don't see it, man. Maybe he catches him with a flash KO. Like, anything can happen. But based on past performances, it's going to be so hard for Reyes to land punches, because Reyes is a single shot puncher, doesn't set his boxing up very well, and it's just so fucking hard to get inside on Jon and land. He's just not there. He's like a fucking ghost. It's just so hard to hit him. So that's what I meant when I said Reyes is, a little bit limited when it comes to boxing. And with him only bringing two challenges for Jon Jones to deal with in the leg kick, the head kick, I just feel Jon will have a solution. And I don't know what that solution is, but I feel that he will have a solution. And then if we look at all the things that Reyes brings to the table, really only two legitimate threats. Well, then you think, well, what has Reyes got to worry about with Jon Jones? Well, a fucking lot, as it happens. He's got a lot to worry about with Jon Jones. So the thing that John does well is he tries to overload his opponent with information. So he's constantly switching stances. If you go back and watch the Thiago Santos fight, he's switching stances multiple times every minute. He's throwing shots from different angles. He's throwing feints. He's throwing a very wide range of strikes. And I've been critical of Reyes' boxing. I've got to be critical of John Jones' boxing as well. John Jones' boxing is not very good. He doesn't really have any hands at all. He's not dangerous with his hands. But it's MMA. He throws a very diverse range of kicks, very, very diverse range of elbows, and he's just very creative. And so if you're John Jones, you know what Reyes does well. And it's unlikely Reyes will have made a massive improvement since his last fight against Weidman or Ozdemir, where we last saw him for a prolonged period of time. Whereas if you're Reyes, you don't know what the fuck John Jones is going to do. You literally have no idea, because he comes into every fight with a different game plan, and there's a million things that he can do to you. You know, one of the things that I think is a huge factor in this fight stylistically is how John, against most opponents, not all, like he didn't do it against Gustafsson, but against most guys, he likes to take control of the centre of the octagon and just chip away at him. And Dan Hardy does an incredible job of explaining this using John Jones's past fights in his recent episode of Inside the Octagon. I recommend you go and check it out. And Dan was showing that when John is taking control of the centre of the octagon, which he likes to do, he just holds that position, and every time his opponent comes over the black line in the middle of the octagon, John Jones fires elbow, oblique kick, kick to the body, goes with the clinch, does something just to push him back. So it becomes very difficult for them to get comfortable and settle into a rhythm, because he's always making it difficult for them to take control of the centre of the octagon back. That's when John actually does get aggressive. And the problem with Reyes' style is you need a lot of time and space to set up the kind of kicks that Reyes throws, right? You can't just spam leg kicks relentlessly for 25 minutes. You can't just spam head kicks relentlessly, head kicks or leg kicks for 25 minutes. So he doesn't have a lot of options in there, especially if John's coming forward, taking that space away that he needs to set up the kicks. And also, on top of that, Reyes doesn't have that much experience. You know, he's only gone the distance 2 times in his UFC fights, only gone the distance 3 times in his 12-fight career, and now he's going to be in a 25-minute title fight against the greatest of all time that can do 1,000 things to you, and you have no idea what version of him is going to show up. Like, that is a fucking tough night at the office, man. That is a tough night at the office. So while I know for many of you the odds on Reyes will be very enticing, and yes, he might catch John with a bomb and knock him out, or yes, John might flake out, he just might not show up at all, and Reyes will win because Jones significantly underperforms. But at these odds, I don't see a ton of value, because the current odds on Reyes 4.50 plus 350 for an implied probability of 22%. On a high risk bet like this, I'd want to be getting a really high margin over the bookies, because obviously the variance is going to be much higher on these kind of bets. So I'd want to be giving Reyes about a 1 in 3 chance of winning to get a meaningful amount of value on a bet like this. And I just don't think you can get there based on his limited range of attacks and based on what John Jones can do to him. Now, I guess the real question becomes, will Jones have learnt from his mistake against Santos, and will he show up and take this fight a bit more seriously? And that's a difficult question to answer, because since the Thiago Santos fight, he's kind of brushed it under the carpet and said, oh, I don't know what the judges were seeing, man. I thought I won that fight. I controlled the centre of the octagon, all that bollocks. Even though we know controlling the centre of the octagon doesn't mean anything anymore, right? The scoring criteria has changed. But that might all be talk for the media, right? John Jones is very experienced at dealing with the media, and when he's gone back and actually watched the fight again in the cold light of day, maybe he's watched it and thought, shit, like, I almost lost that. It was close. I need to do more next time. So it could go either way, right? Is John Jones' ignorance going to lead him down a dangerous path and he continues to perform like that, like he did against Santos? Or is he actually going to use that as an opportunity to change things? Is it going to be a wake-up call for him? It could go either way. But even if he does still fight quite tactically and passively, I still like his chance of beating Reyes because of how limited Reyes' attacks are. And Jones always shows up prepared, right? So that is going to be it for this video, boys. I really hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you find the information in this video really useful. Don't forget, if this video gets 300 likes, we will put out a video on fight day on Saturday where we try and find some fun prop bets and parlays to make watching these fights more interesting. So if you do want me to do that live stream, boys, smash the like button below, and that live stream will be going out on YouTube, Twitch and Mixer. So get involved, man. Hit the like button. And I've said a bunch of shit in this video, right? I've given you guys a lot of strong opinions. So let me know what you think, man. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? How do you see these fights playing out? Leave a comment below, and I'm going to really do my best to respond to as many of you as possible. I read every single comment that gets posted. I just don't always have time to respond. And another thing, boys, the negativity over the last month I've been getting online has been getting me down. But a lot of you, man, so positive. You say some really nice things to me. You're really kind, and you definitely make it worth it. So that's why I'm going to be busting my balls for the rest of the year to bring you as much content as I can. So nice one for watching, boys. I really appreciate it. Take care. I love you all, and I will see you very soon.